Elena stood by the grand marble fireplace, her fingers tracing the edge of a photo frame. It was a picture from their 10th anniversary trip to Tuscany. Marcus smiling, his arm around her waist, the sun warming their faces. Back then, his eyes still lingered on her. Back then, forever hadn't felt like a word spoken just to fill the silence. She wore a simple cream sweater, sleeves pushed up to her elbows, and her dark hair pulled into a loose bun. No jewelry, no pretense, just Elena. Quiet, observant, always listening more than she spoke. From the hallway, the sharp click of polished shoes announced Marcus's return. He didn't look at her when he entered. Instead, he loosened his tie, tossed his briefcase onto the white leather sofa, and poured himself a whiskey without a word. "You missed dinner again," she said, her voice soft but steady. He barely glanced over. "Had a meeting with Chloe. We're finalizing the Singapore venture." "Chloe stayed late again?" His jaw tightened. "She's efficient. Unlike some people who spend their days signing charity checks and calling it a career." The words landed like a stone in still water, ripples spreading through her chest. She didn't flinch, not outwardly, but you could feel it, the quiet fracture inside her, the way her breath hitched just slightly before she steadied it again. "I support causes that matter," she replied, placing the photo back on the mantel with deliberate care. "Not everything has to generate profit to have value." Marcus finally turned to her, his expression unreadable. "Maybe that's the problem, Elena. You live in a world of ideals while I'm out here building empires. You used to inspire me. Now you're just background noise." The silence that followed was heavier than any shouting match. Outside, the rain fell harder. You, watching, standing in that room with her, feel the sting of those words, not because they're loud, but because they're cold. Because they strip away 10 years like they were a mistake. And yet, Elena doesn't cry. Not yet. She meets his gaze, and in her eyes there's something deeper than hurt. Clarity. "I'm not background noise," she says finally, her voice barely above a whisper but firm as steel. "I'm just the woman you stopped seeing." He opens his mouth to respond, but nothing comes. He turns away again, retreating into his whiskey and his pride. And Elena? She walks to the window, presses her palm against the cool glass, and watches the storm roll in. Not with fear, not with rage, but with the quiet resolve of someone who has just realized. She doesn't need this house to be whole. She doesn't need him to be worthy. The rain keeps falling, but inside her, something dry and dormant begins to stir. Like the first green shoot after a long drought. You feel it too, that tiny, trembling hope. Because even in this gilded cage of marble and silence, a soul can remember its own name. And hers is Elena, not Marcus's wife, not the quiet one, just Elena. And that, you realize as the scene fades, is more than enough. Certo, agora tu como narrador e storyteller desenvolva a historia sem marcacos com o nome de cada topico que for desenvolve. Mi conti sobrio topico tu com dialogo como su fosso espectador. Sempre lembrando de desenvolver com vida moco. Com dos sentimentos de forma que a estrutura de narrativa utiliza uma linha temporal linear de modo o espectador sentir o que o personagem está sentindo amigos. Com 6.000 characters quen 3, max every morning at precisely 6:17 a.m. Elena woke alone in a bed large enough for 4. The sheets were crisp, Egyptian cotton. Marcus had insisted on it, but they felt like ice against her skin. She'd rise quietly, careful not to disturb the silence that had long since replaced conversation, and walk barefoot across the cold marble floors toward the window. Outside, manicured gardens stretched endlessly, sculpted hedges and blooming roses arranged with mathematical precision. Beautiful, lifeless, just like the marriage that paid for them. You stand beside her now, watching as she wraps a thin shawl around her shoulders. The house breathes around her, silent, immaculate, impersonal. No laughter echoes in the hallways. No childish scribbles on the fridge. No notes left on the counter. Just the hum of the HVAC system and the distant chime of a grandfather clock ticking off hours that feel borrowed, not lived. Later that morning, in the sun-drenched conservatory, Elena kneels by a small pot of lavender. Not part of the estate's official landscaping, but hers. She'd bought it at a farmer's market months ago, tucked it into a corner where no one would notice. But she noticed. She watered it every Tuesday and Thursday, whispered to it sometimes when the silence grew too heavy. Today, she touches a purple bloom gently, her fingers trembling just slightly. "Mrs. Langford?" A soft voice interrupts. She turns. It's Maria, the housekeeper, holding a silver tray with a single teacup. "Your chamomile. You didn't come to the dining room." "Thank you, Maria," Elena says, rising slowly. Her smile is warm, practiced. But you see the exhaustion beneath it, the weight she carries like a second skin. Maria hesitates. "Is everything all right?" Elena pauses, looks out the glass wall at the pool beyond, empty, gleaming under the pale sun. "It's all very perfect, isn't it?" she says finally, her voice barely above a murmur. "Too perfect to be real." Maria doesn't answer. She knows better than to pry. But her eyes soften, and for a moment, the two women share something unspoken. A quiet understanding that beauty without warmth is just decoration. That afternoon, Elena sits at her desk in the East Wing library, surrounded by ledgers and files. This is her sanctuary within the sanctuary. While Marcus builds empires in boardrooms, she quietly channels funds to women's shelters, literacy programs, orphanages in rural towns. Her name rarely appears on donor lists. She doesn't want recognition, only impact. Her phone buzzes. A message from the director of the Bright Horizons Center. "The new wing opens next month. The girls painted a mural in your honor. They call you the Quiet Angel." A tear slips down her cheek before she can stop it. She wipes it quickly, embarrassed even in solitude. But you feel it. The deep, aching tenderness in her chest. The way her soul still reaches outward even while her own heart feels locked away. Later, as twilight stains the sky in bruised purples and golds, Marcus strides in without knocking. He rarely does. "You're still here?" he asks, loosening his cufflinks. "Where else would I be?" she replies, not looking up from her papers. He sighs, impatient. "This house isn't a charity office, Elena. You could at least look like you belong here. Wear something presentable. We have investors coming Friday." She finally meets his eyes. "I've worn diamonds to please you, smiled at people I didn't trust, sat through dinners where I wasn't seen, only used as decoration. What more do you want?" He doesn't answer, just stares at her as if she's become a stranger in his own home. And maybe she has, not because she changed, but because he stopped looking. After he leaves, the house feels even larger, hollowed out. You stand there with Elena as she walks slowly to the grand staircase, her hand trailing along the banister. Each step echoes. She stops halfway and looks back at the empty foyer, at the portrait of Marcus above the fireplace, at the imported chandelier that casts cold light, at the life she's been living like a ghost in her own story. And then, softly, to no one but herself, she whispers, "I belong somewhere, just not here." You feel it then, the quiet unraveling, not of anger, but of awakening. This isn't just a house. It's a museum of a love that faded without either of them noticing. And Elena? She's still breathing, still giving, still hoping. But hope, you realize as the last light fades beyond the windows, can only survive loud clink of fine china and a voice that didn't belong. Laughter, bright, practiced, bubbling over like champagne. She froze in the doorway. There at her table sat Chloe, not as a guest, not as an employee, but as if she belonged. She wore a tailored cream blouse, sleeves rolled just so, her blonde hair catching the morning light in a way that felt deliberate. Her fingers wrapped around a teacup Elena had received as a wedding gift, delicate porcelain painted with forget-me-nots. "Oh," Chloe said, looking up with wide, innocent eyes. "Good morning, Elena. Marcus said you usually take breakfast in your room. So I didn't expect to see you. The words were polite. The tone? Not quite. Elena forced calm into her limbs, her breath. This is my home, she said evenly, stepping forward. I take breakfast wherever I choose. Chloe's smile didn't waver, but her eyes flickered, calculating. Of course, I just didn't want to intrude. She gestured to the spread. Fresh croissants, berries, imported jam. Marcus insisted I join him. He said you wouldn't mind. He said you wouldn't mind. The phrase coiled in Elena's chest like a wire pulled taut. Before she could respond, Marcus entered. Ty already nodded, briefcase in hand. He glanced between them, his expression tightening. Not with guilt, but with irritation, as if caught in an inconvenience. Chloe's working on the Singapore pitch with me, he said, pouring coffee without looking at Elena. She'll be around more often. More often than what? Elena asked, her voice low but clear. He finally met her gaze. Then you think. A beat of silence. The kind that carves canyons between people. Chloe shifted, setting down her cup with deliberate care. Elena, you must be so busy with your charities. It's admirable. But Marcus needs someone who understands the pace of his world. The pressure. The stakes. Elena didn't look at her. She kept her eyes on Marcus, the man who once whispered, forever, against her temple in the dark. And you think that's you? I know it is, Chloe said softly, because I'm here, present, not hiding in libraries or gardens, pretending the real world doesn't exist. Elena's hands stayed steady, but inside, something cracked. Not from jealousy, but from betrayal so slow it had crept in like fog. She hadn't noticed the erosion until the ground beneath her vanished. You think presence means proximity, Elena said, finally turning to Chloe. But real presence is loyalty, integrity, staying when it's hard, not just when it's glamorous. Marcus exhaled sharply. Don't make this dramatic, Elena. It's business. Is it? She asked, voice trembling now. Not with anger, but with the weight of a truth she could no longer ignore. Then why does she wear your cologne? Why does she know how you take your coffee? Why is she sitting at my table? In my house? Like she's already replaced me. Chloe's mask slipped, just for a second. A flicker of triumph, quickly masked by wounded concern. Elena, I would never... Enough! Marcus cut in, stepping between them like a shield. You're being paranoid. Chloe's brilliant, driven. She sees me for who I am, not some idealized version you've been clinging to. Elena stared at him, really stared, and for the first time, she saw not the man she loved, but the man he'd become. Proud, impatient, blind to everything that didn't serve his image. She didn't shout, didn't cry. She simply straightened her spine, smoothed her sweater, and said, "Then you've already lost me, Marcus. You just don't know it yet." She turned and walked out, not in retreat, but in quiet declaration. But you, watching, feel the shift in the atmosphere. The balance has tipped. Chloe isn't just a distraction. She's a replacement in motion. And Marcus? He's so convinced of his own power that he doesn't see the house of cards he's building. Later that evening, Elena finds a single earring on the hallway rug. Small diamond stud, not hers. She picks it up, rolls it between her fingers. Cold, impersonal, a tiny spark in the dark that doesn't belong. She doesn't throw it away. She places it in a drawer, next to old letters, dried flowers, and the marriage certificate she once framed with trembling hands. And as the moon rises over the silent estate, you feel it too, the gathering storm. Not of rage, but of reckoning. Because the woman who watered lavender in secret is starting to remember. She doesn't need to be chosen to be worthy. And sometimes, the quietest departure is the loudest warning. Need to. The truth was written in the way Maria avoided her eyes at breakfast, in the way the staff exchanged glances when she entered a room, in the scent of Chloe's perfume that now lingered near Marcus's study. Citrus and something synthetic, like ambition bottled. Then, on the fourth evening, it happened. Elena had just returned from visiting a shelter she funded. An afternoon spent listening to stories of women rebuilding their lives. She felt grounded, oddly peaceful, as if their courage had seeped into her bones. She stepped into the foyer, her coat still damp from the light rain outside, and froze. Chloe stood in the grand hall, holding a glass of wine, wearing her silk robe, the one Marcus had gifted Elena on their 5th anniversary. It was deep blue, embroidered with silver thread, and now it draped Chloe's shoulders like a stolen crown. Before Elena could speak, Marcus appeared at the top of the stairs. He didn't look surprised. He looked decided. "There you are," he said, his voice flat, final. "We need to talk." She walked in, set her bag down slowly, and faced him. "About your guest wearing my things? Or about the fact that I'm no longer welcome in my own home?" He descended the stairs, each step echoing like a verdict. "Don't make this about clothes, Elena. This is about us. Or rather, what's left of us." Chloe sipped her wine, eyes gleaming, but said nothing. She didn't need to. Her presence was the punctuation. "You've changed," Marcus continued, stopping just a few feet away. "You've become distant, cold. You don't look at me like you used to." "I look at you exactly as you are," Elena said softly. "But you don't like the reflection." He flinched just slightly, then hardened. "Chloe sees my potential. She believes in me. You've been mourning a version of me that never existed." The words should have cut, but instead they clarified, like fog lifting from a long dark road. "So that's it?" Elena asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "You're choosing her, after 10 years, after everything." "I'm choosing me," he corrected, jaw tight. "And I can't keep living in a marriage that feels like a museum exhibit. Preserved, but dead." The silence that followed was suffocating. Rain began to patter against the skylight again, soft but insistent. Then Chloe stepped forward, her tone syrup-sweet with false sympathy. "Elena, you'll be taken care of course. Marcus has arranged a generous settlement. You can start fresh. Maybe find someone who matches your pace." Elena didn't look at her. She kept her eyes on Marcus, on the boy she'd once stayed up all night talking to about stars and second chances, on the man who now stood before her like a stranger in a tailored suit. "You want me gone?" she asked. "I want honesty," he said. "And the truth is, I don't love you anymore." The words landed, not with a crash, but with a slow, cold seep, like water filling a room you didn't know was sealed. She nodded once, just once. Then she turned, walked to the closet, and pulled out a single suitcase, the same one she'd used on their honeymoon. She moved quickly, deliberately. A few changes of clothes, her grandmother's locket, the lavender plant still blooming in its pot, the folder with her charity records. No photographs, no mementos, nothing that tied her to the illusion. Marcus watched from the doorway, arms crossed, as if waiting for a scene, a plea, a breakdown. It never came. When she zipped the suitcase shut and rolled it to the foyer, he finally spoke again. "You're not even going to fight?" Elena paused, hand on the door handle. She turned, and for the first time in months, she looked him fully in the eyes. Not with anger, not with sorrow, but with a quiet, unshakable dignity. "I already fought," she said, "for 10 years, and you weren't paying attention." Then she stepped outside. The rain had softened to a mist, silver in the glow of the driveway lights. She didn't look back as the heavy oak door clicked shut behind her. Final, absolute. But you, watching, feel the weight of that moment like a held breath. The expulsion wasn't loud. No shouting, no broken glass. Just a door closing on a decade of silence, of being unseen. And yet, something stirs in the damp air as she walks down the long driveway, suitcase in hand, lavender in the other. Not despair. Not yet. Something sharper. Purpose. Because when a woman who's been treated like furniture finally walks out on her own 2 feet, she doesn't just leave a house. She leaves a lie. And somewhere, deep in the marrow of her bones, a question begins to bloom. Not what will I do now, but who will I become? The night wraps around her like a shroud. But for the first time in years, it feels like freedom. And you? You can't look away. Name. She didn't call a car. Didn't call anyone. Not yet. She walked until her calves burned and her breath came in quiet, steady rhythms that matched the drumming in her chest. Not panic, not grief, but resolve, hardening like cooling steel. 2 miles down the winding hillside road, headlights cut through the gray. A car slowed beside her. Elena! She turned. Behind the wheel sat Lila, her oldest friend, the one who'd held her hair back during college heartbreaks, who'd danced with her in kitchens at 3 a.m., who'd never once asked her to be anything but herself. Lila didn't say another word, just unlocked the passenger door. Elena got in, dripping rainwater onto the worn fabric seat. She set the lavender on the dashboard like an offering. For a long moment, neither spoke. The windshield wipers swept back and forth, steady, relentless. "He threw you out?" Lila finally asked, voice low, careful, not probing, just there. "In a manner of speaking," Elena replied, staring out the window. "He didn't throw me. He just stopped seeing me. And then he replaced me with someone who mirrors his ego like a polished mirror." Lila's hands tightened on the wheel. "And you just left? What was I supposed to do, Lila? Beg to stay in a house where I'm a shadow?" Her voice cracked, just once, before she steadied it. "I stayed because I loved him, but love shouldn't make you disappear." Lila reached over, squeezed her hand. "You're not disappeared. You're right here." Elena closed her eyes. Let the warmth of that touch sink in. Let the truth of it anchor her. That night, in Lila's cozy bungalow on the edge of the city, where mismatched mugs lined the shelves and books spilled from every surface, Elena sat cross-legged on the rug, wrapped in an oversized sweater that smelled like cinnamon and lavender soap. Rain still tapped against the windows, but here it sounded like a lullaby, not a sentence. "I keep thinking," Elena whispered, "that maybe I should have fought harder, said more, shouted." Lila handed her a mug of tea. "You didn't owe him a performance. You owed yourself peace." Elena stared into the steam rising from the cup. "All those years, I thought if I was patient enough, kind enough, quiet enough, he'd come back to me. But he never left. He just stopped looking." She set the mug down, walked to the small writing desk in the corner, and opened the bottom drawer, the one she'd packed last. From it, she pulled a slim, leather-bound journal. Not filled with poetry or diary entries, but with careful columns, dates, account numbers. "You remember my grandmother's trust?" she asked softly. Lila nodded. "The one your father said was just sentimental money?" "It wasn't just sentimental," Elena said, her voice gaining strength. "It was strategic. She left it to me with one condition. Don't let anyone tell you it's not enough." She turned the journal toward Lila. "While Marcus mocked my hobby charities, I quietly reinvested every distribution. Low-profile real estate funds, renewable energy startups, a women's co-op in Portugal, all under a shell entity, Aurora Holdings. No one knew, not even Marcus. He assumed I had no financial mind." Lila's eyes widened. "Elena, how much?" "Enough," Elena said, meeting her gaze. "Not enough to rival his empire, but enough to build my own. Enough to never depend on a man's permission again." A silence settled, but it wasn't empty. It was full with possibility, with the quiet hum of a plan taking shape. Then, softly, Elena added, "He thinks I'm broken, that I'll vanish into obscurity. But I won't disappear, Lila." She stood, walked to the window, looked back toward the distant glow of the hills where the mansion stood. "I'm going to rebuild," she said, voice steady as stone. "Not to hurt him, but to prove to myself that I was never nothing, that I was always enough. And in that moment you feel it, not revenge but reclamation, not rage but righteousness, because the woman who left with one suitcase and a potted plant isn't running away. She's gathering her power. And somewhere, deep in the quiet of that rainy night, a promise takes root. Not spoken aloud, but felt in every breath she takes. I will return, not as his wife, but as the owner of everything he thought he could take from her. including the home he so carelessly cast her out of. The storm outside begins to ease, but within Elena, a different kind of tempest is rising. On the windowsill, its purple blooms catching the sun like tiny defiant flames. The night had been restless, not with tears, but with thoughts racing like currents beneath still water. Now, in the quiet hum of morning, birds chirping, coffee brewing, the distant rumble of a city waking, Elena felt something she hadn't in years: clarity. Lila placed a plate of toast between them and sat across, studying her. "You're not just staying here until you find an apartment, are you?" Elena smiled faintly. "No, then what?" Elena traced the rim of her mug. "I need to remember who I was, before Marcus Langford became my whole world." She reached into her bag and pulled out an old photograph, faded at the edges. A younger Elena, maybe 23, standing on a sunlit dock, laughing, wind in her hair, arms around two women who looked like sisters. Behind them, a rustic house with peeling blue paint and a sprawling oak tree. "My mother's lake house," she said softly, "in Cedar Ridge. She left it to me. I haven't been back since before the wedding. Marcus said it was too remote, not practical, so I let it sit, empty, forgotten." Lila leaned forward. "You're going back?" "I need to." Elena's voice thickened. "That's where I painted murals on the walls, where I wrote terrible poetry in notebooks, where I once believed I could build something real, not just manage someone else's success." Later that day, they drove. The city skyline shrank behind them, replaced by rolling hills, then dense forest, then the quiet hush of a forgotten road winding along the lake's edge. When they pulled up to the house, it was worse than Elena remembered. Siding warped, porch sagging, weeds swallowing the path. But the oak tree still stood, massive and proud, its branches stretching like open arms. Lila whistled. "It's full of ghosts." Elena stepped out, suitcase in hand, and walked slowly up the cracked stone path. "Not ghosts," she said. "Memories, and maybe a second chance." Inside, dust motes danced in the sunlight. The old piano sat silent in the corner, sheet music yellowed with time. Her mother's favorite shawl draped over a chair, still faintly smelling of jasmine. That night, after Lila left with a promise to check in weekly, Elena sat on the porch steps, wrapped in that same shawl, listening to the lap of water against the shore. Her phone buzzed, a news alert. Langford Global faces investor backlash amid Singapore venture collapse. CFO resigns. She didn't smile, didn't gloat, but she didn't look away either. A week passed. Elena cleaned, repaired, replanted. She called old contacts, mentors from her university days, former colleagues from early nonprofit work, even a quiet investor who'd once admired her unshakable ethics. To each, she spoke not as Marcus Langford's estranged wife, but as Elena Voss, strategist, visionary, woman rebuilding from the roots up. One afternoon, while sanding the porch railing, her phone rang. Unknown number. "Elena Voss?" a crisp male voice asked. "Yes, this is Daniel Reeves. I used to sit on the board of the Bright Horizons Foundation. You funded our literacy program in 22. Quietly, generously." She paused, sandpaper in hand. "I remember. I heard what happened, and I also heard you've quietly acquired a 12% stake in Cedar Renewables, the solar project in the valley. Smart move. Undervalued asset." Her pulse quickened. "I believe in sustainable returns, and in women-led initiatives." There was a beat of silence. Then, "Marcus Langford just put the estate up for emergency sale. Distress terms. Buyers are circling, but the title has complications. Liens, emotional attachments. It's messy." Elena's breath caught. Not from longing, from possibility. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked. "Because," Daniel said gently, "some houses aren't meant to stay in the hands of those who treat love like a transaction, and some women deserve to walk back through their front doors, not as guests but as owners." He hung up. Elena stood there, the lake breeze lifting her hair, the scent of pine and wet earth filling her lungs. That evening, she sat at the old kitchen table with her journal open, pen in hand. She wrote one sentence, underlined it twice. I don't want revenge. I want justice. And justice looks like a woman reclaiming what was never truly lost, only lent. Outside, the first stars blinked awake, and deep in her chest, something long buried began to bloom, not with bitterness, but with purpose. Because the woman on the porch wasn't hiding. She was preparing, and the mansion on the hill, a quiet power in her hands. She'd spent all night reviewing statements, tracing the flow of her secret investments, verifying balances. Now, with coffee cooling beside her and birdsong drifting through the screen door, she scrolled through the final confirmation email from her legal team. Aurora Holdings' acquisition of Cedar Renewables is complete. Net liquid assets, $87 million. Ready for strategic redeployment. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, not shaking, not racing, just steady, like a pilot before takeoff. A knock startled her. She opened the door to find Daniel Reeves himself, tall, silver-haired, wearing a navy blazer and holding 2 paper cups of coffee. I told you I'd come, he said with a small smile. Thought you might need backup. She let him in. He took in the restored space, the fresh paint, the reupholstered armchair, the lavender blooming in a clay pot on the windowsill. You've been busy, he said. I've been awake, she corrected gently. He handed her a cup. Marcus just slashed the listing price. Again, he's desperate. Chloe's publicly demanding he protect their future. Investors are fleeing. The estate's collateral for loans he can't repay. Elena sipped her coffee, eyes on the lake beyond the trees. So he burned everything for her? He thought he was building something new, Daniel said, but he was just tearing down a house he never appreciated. He paused. You could walk away, Elena. You don't need that place. You've built something real here. She turned to him then, her gaze clear, unwavering. It's not about the house, Daniel. It's about the symbol. For years, I was told I didn't belong in his world, that I wasn't ambitious enough, sharp enough. But that mansion? It was never his. Not really. It was built on partnerships I nurtured, on stability I provided while he chased headlines. And when he cast me out, he didn't just discard me. He erased me. She walked to the old writing desk and pulled out a folder. Inside, architectural plans, title records, financial projections. I'm not buying back a house, she said, voice low but fierce. I'm reclaiming my dignity, on my terms, with my name on the deed. Daniel studied her for a long moment, then nodded. Then let's make sure it's bulletproof. No emotional bids. No public drama. Aurora Holdings will submit an offer through a neutral escrow agent. Cash. Non-negotiable. Closing in 10 days. 10 days. Elena whispered. Before he realizes who's really buying it, Daniel said grimly. Before Chloe convinces him to torch it rather than lose control. That evening, Elena sat on the porch again. But this time, she wasn't just listening to the lake. She was listening to herself. The fear was there, yes. The ghost of the woman who'd walked out with one suitcase, heart in her throat. But beneath it, something stronger pulsed. Certainty. Her phone buzzed. A text from Lila. Heard the news. You're really doing this. Elena typed back. Not for him. For me. She looked up at the sky, now streaked with violet and orange. Somewhere, miles away, Marcus was probably pacing his marble floors, barking at brokers, chasing illusions of control. And Chloe? She'd be polishing her nails, dreaming of ballrooms and red carpets, blind to the fact that her throne was built on sand. But Elena? She was planting roots. The next morning, she met with a real estate attorney in town. No fanfare, no press, just crisp documents, digital signatures, and a wire transfer so clean it left no fingerprints. As she stepped out of the office, the autumn sun warm on her face, she passed a florist's window. Inside, a bouquet of white lilies and purple lavender caught her eye. She walked in. For a new beginning? The florist asked kindly. Elena smiled. For a homecoming. She didn't say which one. But as she drove back to the lake, bouquet on the passenger seat, she felt it. The shift. Not just in assets, but in identity. She wasn't the woman who was kicked out. She was the woman who built an empire in silence, and would soon walk through those gilded doors not as a ghost, but as the owner. And the best part? They wouldn't see her coming. Because the quiet ones? They don't roar. They simply take what's theirs, gracefully, completely, and without asking permission. I don't care what it takes, he snapped. Delay the closing. Find a buyer with deeper pockets. I don't want that property in anonymous hands. Chloe lounged on the sofa, freshly manicured fingers tapping against her tablet. She didn't look up. Maybe if you hadn't promised me we'd host the winter gala here, you'd be less frantic, she said coolly. Now I look foolish. Everyone's asking why the Langford estate is on fire sale. Marcus whirled on her. This isn't about your social calendar, Chloe. My entire portfolio is hanging by a thread. If we lose the mansion as collateral, she finally lifted her gaze, eyes sharp as glass. You only say we when you need me to smile for the cameras. When the board called last week, you told them I was just an advisor, not your partner, not your future. He ran a hand through his hair, exhaustion cracking his usual armor. I'm trying to protect what's left. Protect yourself, you mean? She shot back, standing now, voice rising. You threw away a loyal wife for someone who actually challenges you. And now you're shocked it's messy? Newsflash, Marcus. Ambition doesn't come with a care label. He stared at her, stunned. Is that what this is to you? A transaction? She laughed, a brittle, hollow sound. Everything's a transaction. You taught me that. You just forgot I learned the lesson better than you. Silence crashed down between them, heavier than marble. Later that night, after Chloe had retreated to the guest wing with a slammed door, Marcus stood alone in the master suite. Their suite, staring at the empty closet where Elena's dresses used to hang. Now it was just suits. Cold. Impersonal. His phone buzzed. A message from his broker. Offer accepted. Buyer insists on full confidentiality and immediate possession. Closing in 72 hours. 72 hours. He sank onto the bed, head in his hands. For the first time in years, he felt small. Exposed. Not as a titan of industry, but as a man who'd gambled everything on pride and lost. Meanwhile, miles away, Elena stood in the lake house kitchen, reading the same update on her encrypted email. Daniel had sent it with one line. It's done. Keys transfer Friday at 3 p.m. She didn't cheer, didn't cry. She simply set the phone down, walked outside, and knelt by the garden she'd started planting. Tomatoes, rosemary, lavender. She pressed her fingers into the cool soil, feeling its truth. Life grows where you tend it, not where you abandon it. Back at the mansion, Chloe sat at the vanity in the guest room, scrolling through real estate listings on her phone. She tried to find out who bought the estate, searched shell companies, public records, broker whispers. Nothing. Just a nameless entity. Aurora Holdings. Who the hell are you? She muttered, frustration tightening her jaw. She dialed Marcus. We need to stay through closing. Make sure nothing disappears. Before we're compensated. We're not entitled to anything, he said wearily. The house is sold. We leave Friday. But my things? Your things? He snapped. You've spent 6 months acting like this was your kingdom, Chloe. But you never owned a single brick. Not like she did. The word hung in the air. She. Unspoken but deafening. Chloe's breath caught. You're thinking about her. I'm thinking I made a mistake, he admitted, voice raw. Not because I lost the house, but because I lost someone who actually cared whether I was happy or just powerful. Chloe slammed the phone down. Rage simmered beneath her skin. She wouldn't be discarded like yesterday's trend. If she couldn't keep the mansion, she'd make sure Marcus paid, in reputation, in assets, in pain. But what neither of them knew, what neither could imagine, was that the woman they'd both underestimated was already on her way back. Not with fanfare, not with fury, but with keys in her pocket, lavender in her soul, and the quiet certainty that some returns aren't just physical. They're poetic. And as Friday loomed closer, the air between the lake and the hill grew thick with anticipation. Because by sunset, the woman who left with nothing but a suitcase would walk through those gilded doors again. His phone rang. It was his CFO. Again. Marcus, the Singapore creditors just filed an injunction. They're freezing all offshore accounts linked to Langford Global. If we don't settle by Monday, I know. Marcus cut in, voice hollow. I know. He hung up and rubbed his temples, the weight of his choices pressing down like stone. He hadn't slept in days. Every decision he'd made in the last year, risky acquisitions, blind trust in Chloe's instincts, cutting ties with loyal advisors, all of it now unraveled with brutal speed. He'd chased the illusion of control, and in doing so, lost everything that actually anchored him. Outside, tires crunched on the gravel driveway. Both he and Chloe froze. They weren't expecting anyone until the escrow agent at 3 p.m. A neutral, faceless representative to hand over the keys and sign the final papers. But the car that pulled up wasn't a sedan. It was a modest electric SUV, clean but unremarkable. The door opened, and Elena stepped out. She wore a tailored charcoal coat, not flashy, but impeccably cut. Her hair was pulled back, not in a bun this time, but in a low, confident sweep. In one hand, she carried a leather portfolio. In the other, a single potted lavender plant, now thriving, its purple blooms vibrant against the gray day. Chloe appeared in the doorway first, eyes widening in disbelief. You? Elena didn't look at her. She walked straight to the front steps, calm, deliberate, as if returning from a brief errand, not exile. Marcus appeared behind Chloe, his face pale. Elena, what are you doing here? She stopped at the top step, finally meeting his gaze. I came to collect what's mine. Chloe laughed. A sharp, nervous sound. Don't be dramatic. The house sold to some anonymous buyer. You don't even live here anymore. Elena reached into her coat and pulled out a single sheet of paper. She held it out. Aurora Holdings, she said quietly. The buyer, sole proprietor, me. Marcus stared at the document as if it might burst into flame. That's impossible. You didn't have those resources. I didn't need your permission to build them, she replied. While you were betting on ego, I was investing in integrity. Chloe stepped forward, voice trembling with panic. This is a mistake. You can't just... I can... Elena interrupted, her tone gentle but ironclad. And I did. The sale is final. The keys transfer today. She turned to Marcus, her eyes holding not triumph, but sorrow. You told me I was background noise, but the truth is you stopped listening. And in your silence, I found my voice. Marcus opened his mouth, but no words came. The arrogance that once defined him had crumbled, leaving only a man hollowed by his own choices. Chloe, desperate now, grabbed his arm. Tell her she can't do this. We have rights. You have ours, Elena said evenly, glancing at her watch. Until 5 p.m., you may gather your belongings. After that, security will escort you off the property. I've already notified the staff they're free to stay or go. Their choice, not yours. She walked past them into the foyer, her heels clicking softly against the marble. The same marble she'd once walked barefoot across in loneliness. Now every step echoed with ownership. She set the lavender on the grand console table, then turned to face them both. I'm not here to punish you, she said. I'm here to reclaim a home, not for revenge, but as proof that dignity, when nurtured in silence, can outlast even the loudest arrogance. Marcus looked around at the chandelier, the staircase, the portrait of his father that once loomed over dinner parties. All of it now belonged to the woman he'd cast aside. And in that moment you feel it, the seismic shift, not just of property but of power, of narrative. The man who thought he could discard love like outdated furniture now stood in the ruins of his own making. The woman who left with one suitcase now stood as the architect of her rebirth. Outside, the first drops of rain began to fall. But inside, for the first time in years, the air felt clear. because justice doesn't always arrive with thunder. You can't just erase us, Chloe finally said, her voice brittle but defiant. Marcus built this empire. This house is his legacy. Elena turned slowly, her coat damp at the shoulders from the mist outside. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Legacy isn't built in marble, she said, her gaze steady. It's built in how you treat people when no one's watching. And Marcus, she paused, letting the weight of his name settle. He stopped watching long before he stopped caring. Marcus flinched as if struck. He opened his mouth, but before he could speak, his phone rang, shrill, insistent. He glanced at the screen. Board chair. He answered, voice strained. Not now. Marcus, it's done, came the clipped reply. The board voted. You're out. Effective immediately. We're bringing in interim leadership before the creditors seize everything. The phone slipped from his hand, clattering against the marble floor. He didn't pick it up. He just stared at it, then at Elena, as if seeing her not as the woman he'd discarded, but as the mirror of everything he'd lost by choosing illusion over truth. Chloe scoffed, trying to mask her panic with disdain. So what now? You're going to play gracious queen in your little victory tour? Host charity galas in the ballroom? Elena walked toward the grand staircase, her footsteps echoing with quiet authority. She placed a hand on the banister, the same one she'd touched the night she left, trembling with heartbreak. No gala, she said, turning back. I'm converting the East Wing into a transitional home for women rebuilding their lives after financial abuse. The library will become a mentorship center. And this foyer, she gestured around, it'll be open to anyone who's ever been told they don't belong. Chloe's mask finally cracked. Her voice dropped to a hiss. You're doing this to humiliate us. I'm doing this to heal, Elena replied softly. Something neither of you ever allowed yourselves to do. Marcus finally spoke, his voice raw. Elena, I didn't know it would come to this. You didn't want to know, she said, not unkindly. You preferred the version of me that asked for nothing. But I was never nothing. I was just quiet. She walked to the console table and opened the leather portfolio. From it, she pulled a sealed envelope. She handed it to Marcus. What's this? He asked, wary. Your severance from the property, she said. Not money, a chance. Inside is the contact for a financial rehabilitation advisor, a woman I trust. She helps men like you rebuild without destroying others in the process. He stared at the envelope like it might burn him. Why would you? Because I'm not you, she said simply. I don't need your downfall to feel whole. Chloe let out a strangled laugh. Oh, please, this is a performance. You want him to beg, to grovel. Elena turned to her, eyes clear, voice calm. I don't want anything from either of you. Not your apologies, not your pain, just your absence. She glanced at the grandfather clock. 3:47 p.m. You have an hour and 13 minutes, she said. After that, the locks change. Permanently. She walked toward the study, the room where Marcus had signed papers ending partnerships, firing loyal staff, betting on schemes that crumbled under their own weight. Now, she stood in its center, breathing in the scent of old leather and regret. Outside, thunder rolled in the distance. Back in the foyer, Chloe grabbed her suitcase, her movements frantic now. We're leaving, Marcus. This place is cursed. He didn't move. He just stood there, looking around at the life he'd built on sand, now dissolving in the rain. And Elena? She walked to the window, watching the storm roll over the hills. The same hills she'd walked down with nothing but a suitcase and a promise to herself. Now, she stood in the heart of that same house, not as a ghost, but as its true owner. Not because she wanted to own marble and chandeliers, but because she refused to let her worth be defined by a man's pride. The rain kept falling, the clock kept ticking, and somewhere beneath the thunder, a new story began. Not of ruin, but of redemption. Inside, the house exhaled, not with gloom, but with relief, as if the walls themselves had been holding their breath for years. Elena stood in the center of the grand hall, her coat now hanging neatly by the door, the lavender plant resting once more on the console. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It was expectant, waiting. Her phone buzzed. Daniel. The deed is recorded. Aurora Holdings is official owner as of 4:03 p.m. Press hasn't caught on yet. But they will. Be ready. She typed back, I'm not hiding. Then she walked through the house. Not as a visitor, not as a ghost, but as someone reclaiming sacred ground. She passed the dining room where she'd sat alone too many nights, the conservatory where she'd whispered to her lavender, the library where she'd funded futures while her own was dissolving. Now each room felt different, not because the furniture had changed, but because she had. At sunset, she stepped onto the terrace overlooking the city below, the storm having passed, leaving the air crisp and clean. The first stars blinked awake. Her phone rang again. Unknown number. She answered. Elena Voss? A woman's voice, soft but urgent. Yes. My name is Tasha Reed. I run the New Dawn shelter in Eastbridge. Daniel Reeves gave me your number. He said, you might be opening something soon. Elena's breath caught. I am. I've got 12 women right now, Tasha said, voice thick with exhaustion and hope. Evicted, abandoned, some left with nothing but the clothes they wore. One has a baby. They need a roof, safety, dignity. Elena looked out over the mansion. Its marble, its gardens, its rooms that once echoed with hollow luxury. You can bring them tomorrow, she said. All of them. There was a pause, then a quiet sob. Thank you. You don't know what this means. I do, Elena whispered. She ended the call and stood in the cooling twilight, the wind lifting her hair. Tomorrow, these halls would echo with laughter, with crying babies, with women teaching each other how to write resumes, how to open bank accounts, how to trust again. No more silence, no more performance, just life. Real, messy, resilient life. Later that night, she sat at the old desk in the study, the same one Marcus used to sign deals that enriched only himself. She opened a fresh notebook and wrote at the top of the first page, The Aurora House, a home for those who rebuild. She listed needs: beds, kitchen supplies, counseling hours, job training. Then, at the bottom, she added one more line, No one here will be invisible. As she wrote, a memory surfaced, herself years ago, kneeling in this very room, picking up a shattered vase Marcus had knocked over during an argument. She'd cleaned it without a word, hiding the cut on her finger. Back then, she thought love meant silence. Now she knew better. Love meant presence, protection, power shared, not hoarded. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. She turned. Maria, the longtime housekeeper, stood in the doorway, eyes red but resolute. I heard what you're planning, Maria said in her gentle accent. I'd like to stay, not as staff, as part of it. My daughter, she left her husband last year. She's been sleeping on my couch. Maybe she could come too. Elena rose and walked to her, taking her hands. Maria, you've always been more than staff. You've been family. Of course you'll stay. And your daughter? She'll have her own room. Tears spilled down Maria's cheeks. Senora Elena, you never treated us like servants. Even when he did. Elena squeezed her hands. Because you were never just anything. You were always whole. After Maria left, Elena returned to the terrace. The moon now hung full and silver over the hills. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed. A sound of chaos, of lives unraveling. But here, on this hilltop, something new was stitching itself together. Not from revenge, not from spite, but from the quiet, unshakable belief that everyone deserves a second chance, especially those who've been told they don't. She looked back at the mansion, glowing softly under the moonlight, no longer a monument to excess, but a vessel for healing. And as the first fireflies blinked to life in the garden below, Elena smiled, not with triumph, but with peace. Because the woman who left with one suitcase hadn't just returned as the owner of a house. She'd returned as the keeper of a promise. East Wing, showing them to rooms that once held guest suites for billionaires and now would hold dreams of safety. Elena adjusted the collar of her sweater. The one Lila had given her the night she left. It still smelled faintly of cinnamon. She'd worn it on purpose today, not for comfort, for a reminder. Then tires on gravel. She turned toward the driveway. A sleek black sedan, familiar, polished, arrogant, rolled to a stop. The door opened. Marcus stepped out. He wasn't alone. Chloe stood beside him, impeccably dressed in a tailored beige suit, sunglasses hiding her eyes, but not the tension in her jaw. She held a folder to her chest like a shield. Elena didn't move, didn't flinch. She simply watched them approach, the morning light catching the dew on the roses they'd once walked past without seeing. "You didn't think it would be this easy, did you?" Chloe called out before they even reached the steps, voice sharp as shattered glass. Elena descended one stair, calm. "I didn't think about easy. I thought about what was right." Marcus stopped at the bottom, hands in his coat pockets, shoulders hunched slightly. He looked older, weary. The arrogance had burned away, leaving something raw beneath. "We need to talk," he said, voice low. "This isn't your house anymore," Elena replied, not unkindly. "You don't get to walk in and demand conversation. It's about the foundation," he said quickly. "The Langford Family Foundation. Chloe's name was added to the board 2 months ago, without my full consent. She's trying to liquidate its endowment, redirect funds to a private venture." Chloe whirled on him. "Don't act like you didn't sign the papers. You were too busy trusting me to read them." "I trusted you to build," Marcus shot back. "Not to gut everything for your own gain." Elena listened, arms crossed, heart steady. This wasn't her fight. And yet, it was, because that foundation funded shelters, literacy programs, mental health clinics, the same causes she'd quietly supported while Marcus took credit at galas. "You came here to expose her?" Elena asked. "No," Marcus said, meeting her eyes. "I came because I don't know how to fix it. And you always knew how to see the whole picture." Chloe scoffed. "Oh, spare us the nostalgia. She's not your conscience, Marcus. She's your replacement." Elena finally stepped fully onto the landing, standing just above them, sunlight at her back. "I'm neither. I'm the consequence." She turned to Chloe. "You think power is in taking, but real power is in giving responsibly, ethically, with eyes open." Then to Marcus. "And you? You gave power to someone who saw people as stepping stones. That wasn't love. That was laziness." Chloe's composure cracked. "You have no right." "I have every right," Elena interrupted, voice rising just enough to cut through the air. "Because, while you two were playing king and courtier, real women were losing homes, jobs, hope. And now, this house belongs to them. Not to your ego. Not to your regrets." She walked past them both, heading toward the garden path where Maria was helping unload more boxes. But before she reached the steps, she paused. "Leave," she said without turning. "And don't come back unless you're ready to serve. Not yourself, but others." Marcus didn't move for a long moment. Then, quietly, he took Chloe's arm. "We're done here," he said. Chloe yanked free. "You're really going to let her win?" "I didn't lose to her," Marcus said, voice hollow. "I lost to myself." He walked back to the car alone. Chloe lingered, glaring at Elena's back, but the fight had drained from her. She knew this wasn't a battlefield she could charm her way through. As the sedan pulled away, Elena finally turned and watched it disappear down the hill. Maria approached, holding a tray of tea. "They won't be back," she said softly. "Maybe," Elena replied, "but it doesn't matter. This isn't about them anymore." Inside, a child laughed. Tasha's baby, playing on a rug in what used to be the formal parlor. A woman hummed as she set plates on the dining table. Another stood at the window, touching the glass, whispering, "This is mine now too?" Elena walked back inside, took the tea from Maria, and smiled. Gloved, dirt under her nails. When the gate creaked open, she didn't look up at first. She knew that step. Slow, hesitant. No longer the confident stride of a man who owned the world, but the careful tread of someone who'd lost it. Marcus. He stopped a few feet away, hands in his coat pockets, eyes scanning the yard as if seeing it for the first time. The lavender bloomed beside him, the same plant she'd carried away, now rooted, thriving. "I didn't come to ask for anything," he said quietly. Elena snipped a dead branch and let it fall. "Then why are you here?" He exhaled, watching his breath curl in the cool morning air. "I drove past 3 shelters yesterday. 2 were full. 1 had women sleeping in their cars. I never saw it before." "Not really." She finally turned to him. His face was thinner, his eyes clearer. The arrogance had been scoured away, leaving something fragile, human. "You saw what served you," she said, not unkindly. "That's the tragedy. Not malice, just blindness." He nodded, accepting it. "Chloe filed a lawsuit against the foundation's board. Claims I verbally promised her control. It's baseless, but it'll tie up funds for months. Those programs you care about, they'll suffer." Elena removed her gloves slowly, folding them in her hands. "And you want me to fix it?" "I want you to lead it," he said, pulling an envelope from his inside pocket. He held it out. "I've resigned as chairman, and I've transferred my remaining voting shares to you. Full control of the Langford Family Foundation. No conditions." She didn't take it. "Why me?" "Because you never treated it like a trophy," he said, voice cracking. "You saw it as a lifeline, and I treated it like a footnote." A breeze stirred the trees. Somewhere inside, a baby cried, then was soothed by a gentle voice. "You could have given this to someone neutral," Elena said. "A corporate board, a charity lawyer." "I could have," he admitted. "But I needed you to know. I see you now. Not the woman who stayed quiet. The woman who built something true while I was too busy pretending to be invincible." Tears welled in his eyes, but he didn't wipe them away. "I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm asking you to do what I never could. Use this power to heal." Elena looked at the envelope, then at him, then at the house behind her, now alive with voices, with second chances, with women teaching each other how to stand. She took the envelope. Not for him, for them. "I won't change the name," she said softly, "but I'll change its soul." He nodded, relief and sorrow tangled in his expression. "Thank you." He turned to leave but paused. "Will I ever be welcome here again?" She met his gaze, steady, honest. "Not as the owner, but as a volunteer. If you're willing to listen more than you speak." "Yes." He gave a small, broken smile, the first real one she'd seen in years. Then he walked away, not with his head high, but with his heart open. Elena stood alone in the garden for a long time, the envelope warm in her hands. Inside, Tasha called out, "Lunch is ready. Elena, you coming?" She looked toward the house, toward the women gathered at the table. Survivors, fighters, dreamers. Her new family. "Yes," she called back. "I'm coming." And as she walked inside, sunlight at her back, the weight in her chest wasn't bitterness. It was purpose. Because the woman who once watered lavender in secret now tended a garden of hope, and every bloom was a promise kept. To herself. Then, on a rainless Tuesday afternoon, a sleek white convertible pulled up the driveway. Chloe stepped out. She wore a crisp white pantsuit, heels clicking against the gravel like a metronome counting down to confrontation. Her sunglasses were still on, but her posture screamed desperation masked as confidence. Elena was in the garden, kneeling beside a new bed of lavender saplings, when Maria appeared in the doorway, eyes wide. "Senora Elena, Ella is back." Elena didn't stand right away. She patted the soil around the youngest plant, firm but gentle. Then she rose, brushed off her jeans, and walked toward the terrace steps. Chloe stood at the bottom, arms crossed, head high, but her fingers trembled at her sides. "You're making a spectacle of us," she said before Elena even reached her. "The press found out Marcus gave you the foundation. They're calling it redemption theater. They're calling me a gold digger. Elena stopped at the top step, hands resting lightly on the railing. If the truth feels like theater, maybe you're the one playing a role. Chloe's jaw tightened. You think you've won? You're just a charity case with a bigger house now. I was never a charity case, Elena said, voice calm as still water. I was a partner, a builder. You mistook my quiet for weakness. That was your mistake, not mine. I had everything. Chloe snapped, finally yanking off her sunglasses. Her eyes were red-rimmed, furious, scared. I was supposed to be her, the one in the magazines, the one at his side at galas, the one who finally made him see me. And did he, Elena asked softly, really see you? Or did he just see someone who reflected his ego back at him? Chloe flinched as if slapped. Inside the house, a door opened. Tasha stepped onto the porch, arms crossed, protective. Behind her, two other women lingered, watching silently, not with fear, but with solidarity. Chloe noticed them. Her voice dropped, venomous. This isn't a sanctuary. It's your revenge. You're parading us, him, me, as your villains so you can play saint. Elena took one step down, then another, until she stood just above Chloe on the path. Not looming, just present. I don't need villains to be whole, she said. And I don't need an audience to know my worth. You came here because you're lost. But this house? It's not for the lost who refuse to look inward. It's for those ready to rebuild, honestly. She turned slightly, gesturing to the women on the porch. They left men who told them they were nothing. But they walked away anyway. Not for glamour. For survival. For their children. For themselves. Chloe's breath hitched. You don't know what I've been through. Then tell me, Elena said, not unkindly. Not to justify what you did, but to heal it. This door is open to anyone who chooses truth over performance. For a heartbeat, Chloe looked like she might crumble. Her lower lip trembled. But then the mask snapped back into place. I don't need your pity, she spat. No, Elena said gently. You need your own honesty. And until you find it, you'll keep chasing mirrors. Chloe turned sharply, heels digging into the soft earth as she strode back to her car. But before she got in, she paused, hand on the door, shoulders shaking. Not with rage, but with something deeper. Shame? Grief? The weight of a life built on sand. She didn't look back. As the convertible sped down the drive, kicking up dust, Tasha came down the steps to stand beside Elena. You let her speak, Tasha said, even when she didn't deserve it. I didn't do it for her, Elena replied, watching the road until the car vanished. I did it for the girl I used to be, the one who stayed silent because she thought kindness meant swallowing her truth. Now I know real kindness includes boundaries. And clarity. Inside, a child laughed, bright, unburdened. Elena turned back toward the house, toward the open door, the warm light spilling onto the porch. Chloe might not be ready to change, but Elena was done waiting for people to see her. PTU game of tag in the hall. Her hands moved gently, patiently, the same hands that once signed charity checks in silence. Then the front gate buzzed. Maria, now wearing a lanyard that read house coordinator, glanced at the security monitor near the kitchen. Her expression shifted, surprised, then solemn. It's him, she said quietly. Alone. Elena didn't need to ask who. Marcus stood at the gate. No car, no umbrella, just a man in a well-worn coat, hands in his pockets, staring up at the house like it was a memory he couldn't quite place. He'd walked the mile from the rental apartment downtown, the one he'd moved into after the board ousted him, after Chloe cut ties, after the world he built turned to dust. Elena wiped her hands on her jeans and walked out to meet him. He didn't step forward when she approached, just stood there, eyes tired but clear. I didn't come to stay, he said before she could speak. I came to work. She studied him, the hollows under his eyes, the absence of his usual bluster. Doing what? Anything, he said. Cleaning, repairs, cooking. I've been taking night classes in ethical finance. I want to understand what I broke, and maybe help fix it. She crossed her arms, not to shut him out, but to steady herself. This isn't a redemption resort, Marcus. These women have been hurt by men who promised change and delivered more pain. I know, he said, voice rough, and I don't expect trust, just a chance to earn it, one honest day at a time. From the porch, Tasha watched, arms folded. Maya peeked out from behind her legs, curious. Elena turned back to Marcus. If you stay, you follow the house rules. No titles, no privilege. You eat last. You listen more than you speak. And if anyone here says no to a conversation, to your help, to your presence, you walk away without question. He nodded. Understood. You'll start in the kitchen tomorrow at 6 a.m., she said. Peeling vegetables, washing dishes. No one will call you Mr. Langford. They'll call you Marcus. Or not at all. A faint smile touched his lips, grateful, humbled. That's fair. He turned to go but paused. Elena. Thank you. Not for me. For them. He nodded toward the house, toward the women whose lives had been upended by systems men like him built. You gave them what I never knew how to give. You. She didn't reply right away, just watched the last light catch the silver in his hair. Hair that had once been combed to perfection for magazine covers, now wind-tousled and real. Go get some rest, she said finally. Tomorrow's work begins early. He walked back down the drive, shoulders straighter than when he arrived. Not with pride, but with purpose. Inside, Maya tugged Elena's sleeve. Is that the man who hurt you? Elena knelt to her level. He made choices that caused pain. But people can change, if they're willing to do the hard work. Will he stay? Maya asked, eyes wide. I don't know, Elena said honestly. But if he does, it won't be because I let him. It'll be because he chooses, every day, to be better. Later that night, after the dishes were done and the lights dimmed in the hallways, Elena stood alone on the terrace, wrapped in the same cinnamon-scented sweater. Below, the city glittered, indifferent, vast, full of stories like hers. But here, on this hill, something new was growing. Not perfection, not forgiveness handed out like party favors, but accountability, humility, the slow, steady work of becoming. And as the first stars blinked awake, Elena felt it. Not victory, but peace. Because the woman who once left with one suitcase hadn't just reclaimed a house. She'd built a home where broken things, people, promises, hearts, could heal without shame. Mirror and whispered her own name like a promise. Elena stood in what had once been the formal ballroom. Marble floors now covered with colorful rugs, crystal chandeliers replaced with warm pendant lights, the long wall lined with bookshelves, easels, and a small stage. Today was the opening. She adjusted the mic on the modest podium, heart pounding not with fear, but with awe. Around her, women bustled, Tasha arranging chairs, Maria setting out tea and lemon bars, Maya handing out handmade programs with crayon-drawn borders. At 3 p.m., the first guests arrived, not society pages or influencers, but survivors, counselors, teachers, neighbors. And among them, Marcus, now leaner, quieter, wearing a simple button-down and standing near the back, eyes scanning the room with something like reverence. Elena stepped to the mic. Welcome, she began, voice steady but warm, to the Aurora Center for Renewal, a soft murmur of applause. This space was once a symbol of everything I thought I needed to be worthy. Beautiful, silent, perfect. But worth isn't found in palaces. It's found in community, in courage, in the quiet decision to start again. She gestured to the walls. This room will host job interviews, art therapy, financial literacy workshops, and storytelling circles where no one is interrupted, no one is dismissed. Because here, every voice matters. Not because of what you've achieved, but because you're here, alive, trying, healing. A woman in the front row, her hair streaked with gray, wiped her eyes. She told Elena last week she'd left her husband with nothing but her daughter's asthma inhaler and a bus ticket. Elena continued, This center isn't my gift to you. It's ours. Built by hands that know what it means to rebuild from rubble. And it will always be open to anyone who's been told they don't belong. After her speech, music began. Soft guitar played by a young woman who'd once slept in a shelter bathroom. People mingled, touched the books, laughed over pastries, lingered in corners sharing stories in low tones. Marcus approached quietly, holding 2 cups of tea. "I didn't know it would feel like this," he said, handing her one. "Like what?" she asked, wrapping her hands around the warmth. "Like hope," he said, looking around. "Real hope. Not the kind sold at galas, but the kind that grows in cracked soil." She studied him, the shadows under his eyes now framed by humility, not exhaustion. "You're doing the work." "I'm trying," he said. "Last week, I helped Tasha's daughter apply for college scholarships. She called me sir. I told her to call me Marcus. She laughed and said, 'Only if you stop folding napkins like they're legal briefs.'" Elena smiled. A real one. Later, as the sun dipped below the hills, casting golden light through the tall windows, Maya ran up to them, breathless, holding a small potted plant. "Look," she said, beaming. "We grew new lavender from the mother plant. We're giving one to every woman who moves through Aurora House. So they remember they can bloom anywhere." Elena knelt, touched the tiny purple buds. "Who thought of that?" Maya grinned. Marcus did. They both looked at him. He shrugged, almost shy. "You taught me that roots matter more than rooftops." Elena stood, her throat tight. She didn't say thank you. She didn't need to. The look they shared, brief, honest, unburdened, said everything. As evening deepened, the guests began to leave, hugging staff, promising to return. The house settled into a peaceful hum. Women lingered in the kitchen, washing dishes together, singing off-key to an old song on the radio. Elena walked out onto the terrace alone, the cool air brushing her cheeks. Below, the city lights shimmered like scattered stars. But up here, on this reclaimed hill, something brighter glowed. Not wealth, not fame, but belonging. She thought of the woman who'd walked out with one suitcase, heart in pieces. She'd returned not to gloat, but to build. And in doing so, she hadn't just healed herself. She'd made space for dozens of others to do the same. A soft step behind her. Marcus again, holding a blanket. "It's getting cold," he said, offering it. She took it, their fingers, brushing just for a second, no tension, no past, just 2 people standing in the same present. "You staying tonight?" she asked. "In the staff quarters," he nodded. "Maria says I make decent pancakes." Elena smiled, tucking the blanket around her shoulders. "Then tomorrow's going to be a good day." He looked out over the garden, where the new lavender swayed in the breeze. "Yeah," he said softly. "It really is." And as the first fireflies blinked to life among the blossoms, Elena knew this one mattered. Marcus had settled into his role like a man finally finding his true shape. He rose before dawn to prep the kitchen, taught financial basics in the library twice a week, and on quiet evenings, sat on the back porch with Tasha's teenage son, helping him with college applications. No headlines followed him. No boardrooms called. And for the first time in his life, he didn't miss them. But change never comes without echoes. One afternoon, as Elena reviewed grant proposals in the sun-drenched study, now painted a soft sage green, shelves lined with books on trauma recovery and women's economics, her phone buzzed. It was Daniel. "They're watching," he said without greeting. "The old guard. Langford's former board. They've been sniffing around, asking questions about Aurora House's funding. Someone leaked that you control the foundation now." Elena's pen stilled. "Let them look. They're planning a press piece," Daniel continued, "implying you're using charitable funds to personalize the estate, calling it emotional retribution disguised as philanthropy." She closed the folder, her jaw tight not with fear, but resolve. Then it's time they see the truth. 2 days later, Marcus found her in the garden, pruning roses under a wide-brimmed hat. He held a newspaper folded to the business section. His expression was grim. "They published it," he said, voice low. From cast-off wife to controlling heiress. Has Elena Voss weaponized charity? She didn't take the paper. I read it this morning. And? He asked, searching her face. What are you going to do? Nothing, she said, snipping another dead bloom. Because they're already wrong. He frowned. Elena, this could hurt the foundation. The women? They don't need my defense, she interrupted gently. They need my presence. That evening, she called a house meeting. The women gathered in the ballroom-turned-community space, faces wary but trusting. I won't hide from this, Elena began, standing before them without notes, without armor. Because none of you hid your truth when it would have been easier to stay silent. So I won't either. She told them everything. The article, the accusations, the whispers that she'd turned pain into power for selfish ends. Tasha stood. Then we speak too. And so they did. The next morning, 12 women, teachers, nurses, artists, survivors, walked into the offices of the city's major newspaper. Not with lawyers, but with stories. They sat in the editorial room and spoke for 3 hours. About jobs found. About children sleeping safely. About learning to say no and mean it. About Marcus, who now cooked meals without being asked and listened without interrupting. One reporter later wrote, Aurora House isn't a revenge fantasy. It's a revelation. But the real turning point came a week later. Marcus stood at the edge of the garden, watching Elena confer with a new arrival, a woman with tired eyes and a suitcase held like a shield. He took a deep breath, then walked to the mailbox at the end of the drive. Inside was a letter from the Langford Global Ethics Committee, a formal inquiry, demanding explanation for his continued association with a contested asset. He didn't open it fully, just stared at the letterhead, the same logo that once meant empire, now reduced to suspicion. That night, over shared stew in the kitchen, he told Elena. She listened quietly, then set down her spoon. You don't owe them anything, Marcus. Not your loyalty. Not your silence. He looked down at his hands, hands that once signed billion-dollar deals, now calloused from scrubbing pots. I used to think integrity was about winning. Now I know it's about staying, even when no one's applauding. The next morning, he didn't go to the foundation office as usual. Instead, he walked to the city square and stood before the old courthouse steps. Reporters gathered, sensing drama. But Marcus didn't announce a comeback. He didn't rage against his ousting. He simply said, I led with arrogance. I failed the people who trusted me. And the only way I know to atone is not with words, but with work. Every day, in that house on the hill, I'm learning what real leadership looks like. From women who've survived far worse than I ever will. He paused, voice thick. If that's not redemption, it's at least a start. Later, back at Aurora House, Elena found him washing dishes, sleeves rolled up, steam rising around him. You didn't have to do that, she said. He glanced at her, eyes clear. Yes, I did. Not for them. For me. And for the woman who showed me that power isn't taken. It's given responsibly. She picked up a dish towel and stood beside him. They worked in silence for a while. The clink of plates, the warm water, the scent of lemon soap. Outside, the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the garden where lavender bloomed in defiant rows. And in that quiet kitchen, no titles remained. Only two people healing side by side. Because sometimes, the deepest transformation isn't in grand gestures. It's in showing up, day after day, with clean hands and an open heart. Volunteers, friends. The lavender that once bloomed in a single clay pot now lined the terrace in dozens of pots, each gifted to a woman as she stepped into her new life. Elena stood at the window of the study, now her office, though she preferred working at the kitchen table, watching Marcus help Tasha's daughter, now accepted to university, pack boxes for her dorm. He folded sweaters with the same care he once reserved for legal briefs, and the girl laughed as he tried to tuck a framed photo of her mother into the suitcase, just right. Her phone buzzed. A message from Daniel. The Langford Foundation audit is complete, clean, transparent. The board has issued a public statement. Under Ms. Voss's stewardship, The foundation has achieved its highest impact in 2 decades. She didn't smile. Not because she wasn't relieved, but because she no longer needed their validation. Later that evening, as golden light pooled across the hardwood floors, Marcus found her on the back porch, wrapped in a quilt Maria had stitched from old curtains. He held 2 mugs of spice cider. "They praised you," he said, handing her one. "Called you a model of ethical leadership." She took the mug, warmth seeping into her palms. "I didn't do it for praise." "I know," he said, sitting beside her on the swing. "But it matters. Not because they finally see you, but because the women who benefit from those grants will never doubt their worth again. You made sure of that." A silence settled between them, comfortable, deep, earned. "You know," he said softly, "I used to think success was measured in acquisitions, in boardrooms, in how many people deferred to me." He looked out over the garden, where new saplings, oak, maple, olive, had been planted by residents over the past year. "Now I measure it in moments like this. In Maya calling me Uncle Marcus. In Tasha sleeping through the night for the first time in years. In knowing I didn't just lose everything, I finally found what mattered." Elena turned to him, the lines around her eyes softer now, her shoulders no longer braced for impact. "You didn't find it because you lost your empire, Marcus. You found it because you stopped running from yourself." He nodded, throat working. "And you never stopped being whole. You just stopped pretending you needed his permission to be seen." She leaned back, the swing creaking gently. "The truth is, I was always enough. I just forgot to believe it." From inside, laughter spilled out. Lila visiting for the weekend, teaching a group how to make tamales in the kitchen. The scent of cumin and masa floated through the screen door. Marcus watched her for a long moment. "Do you ever regret staying silent all those years?" She considered it. Not with bitterness, but with wisdom. "No, because that silence taught me how to listen. And listening, really listening, is how you build something that lasts." He smiled faintly. "I used to think love was about being chosen. Now I know it's about showing up, even when you're not asked." They sat in the gathering twilight, sipping cider, as the first stars blinked awake above the hills. Below, the city shimmered, indifferent to the quiet revolution happening on this hilltop. But here, in this reclaimed space, something profound had taken root. Not vengeance, not even forgiveness, but something deeper. Recognition. Recognition that worth isn't granted by others. It's claimed through action, through integrity, through the daily choice to build rather than burn. Elena looked at Marcus, not as the man who broke her heart, but as the man who was learning, slowly, how to hold something gently. And in that moment you feel it too, the emotional truth that pulses through every heartbeat of this story. Real power isn't in owning a mansion. It's in making it a home. For yourself, for others, for everyone who's ever been told they don't belong. And as the night deepened, and the fireflies returned to dance among the lavender, Elena knew this wasn't just her redemption. Now, she stood in the grand foyer, no longer grand in the old sense, but grand in its humanity, watching Maya pin a handmade sign above the new wing's entrance. "Aurora House, where you belong before you prove anything." Marcus was beside her, holding a toolbox, having just helped install shelves for the new library annex. His hair was dusted with snow, his cheeks pink from the cold, but his eyes, steady, kind, held none of the restless hunger that once defined him. "You did it," he said quietly, not looking at the sign, but at her. "I didn't do it alone," she replied, her breath misting in the air. "None of us ever do." Inside, the inaugural gathering of the Aurora Circle was beginning. Women who had passed through the house now returned as a council of mentors, advisors, and friends. They sat in a wide circle of mismatched armchairs, hands wrapped around mugs of cocoa, voices low and warm. Elena joined them, taking the empty seat between Tasha and Lila. No one spoke first. They simply waited because here, silence wasn't emptiness. It was respect. Finally, an older woman named Grace, who'd arrived last spring with only a bus ticket and a Bible, cleared her throat. I used to think my value died when my husband said I was nothing, she said, voice trembling but strong. But in this house, I learned my value was never his to give or take. One by one, they spoke not of pain but of possibility, of jobs secured, degrees earned, children sleeping without fear, of learning to look in the mirror and say, I am enough. When it was Elena's turn, she didn't speak of Marcus, didn't speak of the mansion, the headlines, the fall from grace. She spoke of the lavender. I carried one plant out of here, she said, eyes glistening. One fragile, blooming thing that reminded me I could still nurture life, even when mine felt barren. And today, that same plant has given rise to over 200 others, each one gifted to a woman walking out that door with her head high. She looked around the circle. That's what this place is. Not a monument to what was lost, but a garden for what grows after. Later that night, after the fire had burned low and the last guest had left, Elena walked the halls alone. She passed rooms now named not after donors, but after virtues: courage, clarity, rest, truth. She stopped at the old master suite, now the rest room, where women could sleep undisturbed for the first time in years. The bed was neatly made, sunlight still caught in the white quilt. She touched the doorframe, remembering the woman who'd slept there in silence, waiting for a love that never truly saw her. That woman was gone, not erased but transformed, and in her place stood someone who knew dignity isn't given, it's reclaimed. From the terrace, Marcus called softly, You coming in? Maria made apple pie. She turned, smiled. In a minute. He nodded, understanding, and left her to the quiet. She stepped outside, snow crunching under her boots, and looked up at the sky, clear, endless, full of stars. Somewhere out there, another woman was walking away from a life that told her she wasn't enough. And Elena hoped, prayed, that somehow she'd hear of a house on a hill where silence wasn't punishment, but peace, where leaving wasn't failure, but freedom, where returning wasn't weakness, but wisdom. The title had been true. Billionaire kicked out his wife for a side chick. A week later, she returned as the mansion's new owner. But the real story was never about ownership. It was about belonging. Not because she bought the deed, but because she dared to believe she deserved a home. And not just for herself. For every woman who'd ever been made to feel invisible. She turned back toward the light spilling from the windows, toward the laughter, the warmth, the life blooming in every corner. She walked inside and closed the door, not on the past, but on the lie that she ever needed permission to be whole. Because the truth, now written in every brick, every book, every blooming lavender stalk, was this: she was always